massive Bitcoin turnaround, dropping a lawsuit against Coinbase. And that could trigger a massive signal for Bitcoin and crypto worldwide. We also see the so-called bull chart 2025, which shows that the money supply in China is exploding massively. We all know that a rising and exploding money supply is good for Bitcoin. However, we have to be careful here because some things are being reported incorrectly. And here we have to take a closer look at what this chart is all about. And we have another Bitcoin twist, as Kash Patel is the new FBI director in the US. And this is very special because Kash Patel is the next person in the US administration to hold massive Bitcoin holdings here. We need to look at this too, because we're seeing more and more people in the Trump administration team holding massive Bitcoin assets. And that's good for Bitcoin because it means that the whole administration in the US has the incentive to pump up the Bitcoin price. And then we have a statement from Samson Mow, who says that the Bitcoin price is currently being suppressed and manipulated, is someone we should also take a look at. But first, let's start here with the SEC. And it is always the case, regulation. Yes, some people might say, okay, what do I care? Regulation is not that important. But we just have to know that for many companies, regulation is very, very important. And when there's regulatory uncertainty like there has been for a long time in the US, then we have a big problem. And now we see that the new SEC, after the Trump inauguration, is radically different from the SEC. Just like we saw before Trump, we can see now that the SEC is dropping the lawsuit against Coinbase. This still needs to be finally confirmed, but as I understand it, it is just a formality. And actually, the story is pretty much over now. Here we also see the news that the SEC is dropping the lawsuit or is now backtracking. And that's a really, really good sign. We also have a statement from Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong, who says that this is a massive blow to global Bitcoin and crypto adoption. Coinbase also wants to do a lot of shitcoin stories and so on, but this is definitely good.
Because we just heard from the SEC staff that they're planning to withdraw their litigation against Coinbase. Now, this still needs to be approved by the SEC commissioners, but we're hoping that happens next week. And if this goes through, it's a really big deal, not just for us, but for the whole crypto industry, the 50 million Americans who hold crypto, and I think for the rest of the world, because this is an important signal about where things are going. Now, ultimately, we still need to get legislation for crypto passed in America to codify some of these rules and make sure the industry can get built on shore. But if this goes through, it's still a very important legal precedent that rights a wrong that was taking place over the last few years, where the SEC, unlawfully in my view, decided to attack or even try to kill the entire crypto industry by suing lots of different companies, including us, claiming that many of these crypto assets were securities.
Donald Trump has also announced that he wants to end the fight against Bitcoin and crypto. And this is now the final blow, showing that the SEC situation with Coinbase is likely going to end well. And here Brian Armstrong confirms again that this will be huge for Bitcoin and crypto adoption worldwide, not just in the U.S. We just need to know that if a company is really, really uncertain about regulations, then you don't start a Bitcoin business, you don't open a Bitcoin bank. And Coinbase went public, and that was reviewed. Then everything was fine at first. 2 years later, it was like, no, everything's not fine anymore. And yes, Coinbase has probably done some weird stuff here with shitcoins and whatever. But in the end, this is still a really, really good step for Bitcoin. This victory not only strengthens legal certainty for innovation, but also sends a clear message to policymakers and the crypto Bitcoin space. Instead of protecting uncertainty through retroactive lawsuits, we need clear, fair rules that drive technology and markets forward, not block them. Shout out to the EU too, because we have the same problem here where the regulations are sometimes too strict or unclear. And that's why a lot of companies prefer to go to the US, Switzerland, or elsewhere. And then we have the next twist, and that's the new confirmed FBI director. Kash Patel owns Bitcoin products from Grayscale worth over $100,000 and shares in Core Scientific, a Bitcoin mining company worth up to $100,000. Some even wrote $250,000. It's definitely more than $100,000 in Bitcoin positions. A lot of people are expecting a lot from the Kash battle, that it will uncover a lot of things about what went wrong here at the FBI. But what we have to take away from this for Bitcoin is that we now have people here in the FBI who are pro-Bitcoin. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean he's the ultimate Bitcoin bull or anything like that. I also know relatively few Bitcoin statements from him, but we have the certainty that he owns Bitcoin. And if he owns Bitcoin, then he has the incentive to drive up the Bitcoin price. To be honest, for an FBI director like that, that's pretty cool, but it's not a mega position where you have to say, okay, that's an absolute overburner or something like that. Sure, it's great, but we shouldn't overhype it. Or something like that. You just take that as a positive sign. One of many other positive signals, because the list just keeps getting longer. Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, RFK. Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, who else is there? David Sachs. There are so many people in the Trump team who own Bitcoin now. And I always say the important thing is not what people say, but what people do and what people have in their portfolio. Because a lot of people will talk to you and say, yes, Bitcoin is really, really great and so on. But we should also look at what they themselves own. Trump himself has Bitcoin. Eric Trump has Bitcoin himself. Everyone here on the Trump team, they all have Bitcoin themselves. If we consider that, we have to assume they also have the incentive to pump Bitcoin up. Because if we take a look at the whole Trump and Elon Musk politics, we have to honestly say that it's not some altruistic bunch or anything like that. It's also about boosting their own stakes. It's the same with Elon Musk as it is with Donald Trump, because a lot of people have asked, okay, why is Elon Musk getting into politics now? Yeah, he might be hoping for that too. That he might pump his own bags even higher, sure. Could also just be an assumption on my part. But you can definitely assume that because that's often the case, when people take on such high positions, like in these big offices. And then we had the bullish chart for 2025, where you can absolutely see the Valhalla move in the Chinese money supply. Here's the M1 money supply, which is shooting up massively. I've explained this so many times that the M1 and M2 money supply are heavily correlated with Bitcoin. And that means that if we are here, if we see a peak up here, then the Bitcoin price will shoot up massively. And a lot of people have said, wow, it's absolutely crazy what's happening in China. They're starting up quantitative easing again, and now the money supply is shooting up massively. We've got a total game changer here, and now Bitcoin is on the move. But we have to mention that just a few months ago, it was announced that the measurement of the M1 money supply would be changed. So they're just measuring it differently now. Can't give any details on how exactly you measure it, but this is just more of a display error or no display error. But a display change, one has to say that simply here the measuring stick is changed here. And that shows again that it is so important here in Bitcoin to maybe price things from time to time, because with Bitcoin we have a fixed ruler that does not change all the time. Because we keep seeing that the inflation data gets changed, like how inflation is calculated. That means over the last 50 years, the way inflation is calculated has changed multiple times. Back in the day, it was the expansion of the money supply. By now, it's a basket, and then that basket itself gets manipulated. So there are always different things that change from time to time. But the crazy thing is that here with Bitcoin, we have something like a standard meter. With Bitcoin, nothing ever changes. And that's why so many people say, hey, use Bitcoin as a portfolio tracker. If you have more Bitcoin at the end of the year than at the beginning of the year, then you have managed your investments very, very well. And if you look at it over a longer period, like a 5-year span, then the volatility doesn't even matter. Then you just look, okay, do you have more Bitcoin? Do you have less Bitcoin? But what if you are using any other measuring metrics, like the US dollar, which is also being evaluated all the time, or any inflation data or something like that? Then it could well be that the data is manipulated, twisted, distorted. The definitions are changed, and that is very, very important to take into account for Bitcoin, that we have a standard meter here. And you have to be clear that this isn't going to boost the Bitcoin price. It's just changes in how things are presented. That's how the classic fiat world always works. People always try to make things look better. You then say, okay, hey, the gross domestic product is really, really great. But then you forget that massive amounts of money are being printed, that money is simply being pumped into the economy, and that the gross domestic product is being artificially pushed up. Or there are other indicators that are swapped around, for example, the debt ratio in relation to gross domestic product, where the debt is simply reduced. If, for example, you take pension entitlements out of the debt, or if you take other metrics out of the debt, and then the unofficial debt actually becomes much larger than the official debt. There are so many possibilities for manipulation in the fiat system, and that's why we always come back to the original Bitcoin. And of course, it is still a bit difficult at the moment because we live in the fiat world. And I realize that there is a certain volatility compared to Bitcoin, but on a longer time frame, it can really be worth changing the unit of account here. And then you realize, hey, life isn't always getting more expensive. It's actually getting cheaper. Because back in the day, a house cost 1,000 Bitcoin, then 500, then 100, and now it's down to just 10. And eventually, it'll cost just 1 Bitcoin, and then maybe even 0.1 Bitcoin. And then we have another interesting topic here. The Bitcoin price is currently just under $100,000. And now, in the last few days, whenever there are these sideways phases, you always hear about it. Reports say that the Bitcoin price is being manipulated, that it's being suppressed. And a lot of people are wondering, we have all this bullish news. I see it in the comments all the time, like, hey, we have all this bullish news. What's up with the Bitcoin price? Why isn't it going up? Samson Mow has a really interesting thesis about this. He's saying, or warning, that the movement of Bitcoin looks manipulated and possibly suppressed, as it moves in an unnatural, tight range despite strong institutional selling. And I've pulled up some numbers to show why he thinks it might be suppressed. If we just look at the fundamentals here, they're looking super bullish. It's been 306 days since April of last year. So that means we've mined 137,700 Bitcoin during that time. That's how much new Bitcoin the network has produced. Then we have MicroStrategy, which has now acquired 264,340 Bitcoin. So that means that's pretty close, double what was distributed here. Then we have US ETFs that have acquired another 331,857 Bitcoin here. 31,857 Bitcoin here. That means the Bitcoin ETFs alone have acquired nearly 3 times the amount of Bitcoin that has been distributed. And you just have to understand that a massive supply shock is already happening right now. Then we also have to mention that it says here. Of course, that doesn't add up. A mining company has acquired 45,478 Bitcoin here. And it's also pretty crazy that a single company is acquiring nearly a third or something like that of the distributed Bitcoin all by itself, just one mining company. Yeah, let's just say a third or something like that of the distributed Bitcoin is being acquired by just one mining company. I mean, MicroStrategy really took the cake, didn't they? Those are numbers that are pretty astonishing. Then we have other public companies that bought another 6,000 Bitcoin. Short-term buying pressure is what it says here from holders minus ETFs, MicroStrategy, and other purchases, publicly traded companies within 155 days. That was another 194,000 Bitcoin. Then we have 280,000 Bitcoin that were bought off the exchanges. And that's basically all the buying pressure. And then there are sellers on the other side. We're seeing selling pressure from long-term holders, 312,000 Bitcoin, and net that means here in the end. 449,491 Bitcoin, 3.26 times the amount mined since the halving. So, for comparison, 137,700 Bitcoin were mined, and 449,000 Bitcoin were net bought here. And that's why the Bitcoin price has increased, because there are more sellers than sellers. And these trends will continue. This means MicroStrategy will potentially keep buying more Bitcoin than is being mined here. The ETFs will buy more Bitcoin than is being mined here. And that's really, really exciting. It's worth mentioning that there were also reallocations at the beginning with the ETF scales, but it still looks like these flows could continue. And that clearly means that the Bitcoin price will continue to rise. And Samson Mow also mentioned in an interview that holding is like, I often use this example, it's like a volleyball that's being pushed down a bit. And at some point, it can't be pushed down anymore, under the water, and then it explodes upwards. And then you get that price spike that you see so often. And it might even be that when the video is online, that we will be over the 1,000,000 again. Because currently, now we've seen some positive price developments in the last 24 hours. Guys, let me know what you think about the current movements. Are you bullish or bearish? If you want to buy more Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code. See you later, folks. Peace out.